welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am one of your hosts today, Jen, and I am joined by my colleague.
Hello, this is Jessica. Nice to be here.
And we are joined by the creators behind an absolutely charming new graphic novel. It is one of the cutest things I have ever seen, and it really warmed my heart. And I am so excited to bring this book to our listeners. So welcome. Could I ask you both to introduce yourselves and your book?
Sure. I'm Oliver Ono. I'm a comic book artist out of Ohio, been in LA for a while, but now I'm back here just living in my little peaceful hometown. Yeah, and super excited to show you guys the upcoming book.
Yeah. I'm Rosie Knight. I'm from London originally. I'm a writer. I'm the author of this book and Godzilla Rivals, which me and Oliver did together as well. Now I live in LA. And I am a Manila super stan, so I'm very excited that we got to tell this story together. And I'm just really excited for everyone to see Oliver's gorgeous art, because as you guys said, it's so cute.
It really is absolutely delightful and so cute. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about how this collaboration came to be and how this project arose?
So originally, as I mentioned, me and Oliver first worked together on Godzilla Rivals Batra, which was my first Godzilla book and Oliver's first Godzilla book. And I pitched on that book. It got picked up and they said, oh, is there an artist that you would like to work with? And I said, well, there's this artist I love on Instagram called Oliver Ono. He does fantastic mechs and stuff. Like, can we reach out to him? They said yes. They reached out to Oliver. And once I knew it was going to be Oliver working on that book, I made sure to kind of reimagine the world to be a little bit more cozy and a little bit more kind of Ghibli inspired. We have a whole cooking page on that. We also have some really fun like mechs, but they're mechs that help you carry your shopping and kind of like everyday, because I didn't want there to be mechs that could fight Godzilla. So that was really fun. Oliver absolutely smashed it. We became friends while we were working on it. And the book actually became like, we got a lot of, it was really popular, but we got a lot of great responses from kids. And at the time, Toho was looking to do more kids. They wanted to do kids comics. So I pitched Monster Island Summer Camp with the idea that Oliver would always be the artist. And like a year and a half later or something, IDW got back and they were like, we're going to make it. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going to make it. And that was kind of how it seemed from my side. Oliver, what was your experience of it?
Yeah, I mean, you did a really good job at retelling the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, I think we followed each other for like a few months before I got the call. It was like for the initial book, it was like maybe January 2nd of like 2022 or something like that. I remember being like, this is like the best New Year's news that I could have ever like gotten. Like and it was weirdly close. It must have been Jazz Joiners, who was our editor for that book.
Yeah.
It must have been like her first day back after the holiday. But
yeah, it must.
Yeah, massive news for that day. And then obviously the rest of that year was just kind of putting the book together. And I think, Rosie, it was like a really high selling
it was, yeah,
wasn't it?
It was at the time, it was the highest selling version, that issue they'd have of Rivals.
Yeah.
But it was also the week it came out, it was the highest selling book. So it sold more than G.I. Joe. It sold more than a couple of other new things they'd had. So I think people were really excited to see Oliver's art and like a new style. Also, as we've learned from the Godzilla fandom, is very passionate. And Batra has only ever been in one movie. So they were very excited to see that character. And we found that with Monster Island Summer Camp. I really thought Manila was more of, a lot of people don't like him because he's kind of so dwarfy, but we've actually found that there's like a very passionate Manila fan base. And also in general, the Godzilla fandom, I would say, is a truly lovely, like fantastic fandom. Like they're very pure, they're very supportive. We've gotten to do some really cool events and just get to meet people who this stuff means so much to. So that's been really special.
So let's jump in just a little bit and talk about the characters because I absolutely adored them. Tell us, for those who may not be Manila savvy, I want to hear about Manila, but I also want to hear about Wheezy, Rumiko, and Zelda because I absolutely loved them. I keep saying to Jen that as a redhead myself, I would have loved to have Wheezy's hair at that age. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about them.
Well, Manila is, in the context of the movies, he is Godzilla's son, though we never say that in this space because there are some interesting licensing laws about the way you can talk about the characters. But he is very well known in the Godzilla community because when he came out in the kind of the 60s movies, he was a little bit dwarfy. The suit was kind of busted, and he's kind of a silly character. But I always really loved him. I like an ugly character that no one else likes. I have a tattoo of Manila. And then I wanted to make sure that my original idea for this was like, what if you went to a summer camp and you kind of found out there were monsters there? And from there, it kind of started this idea of, I really wanted to make a comic that had disabled leads. I'm disabled. I really wanted to make a comic about kids who wanted to make comics. And that was how Zelda came to be. She's amazing. She uses a cane. She is a fantastic cartoonist. Oliver brought that part to life so well. And then from there, at the beginning, it was like Zelda was more isolated and she ended up kind of going off with Manila. And I was like, well, I think that she needs to have like the friends go along with her. And we need to have her, in this space where it's kind of more of a team. So Wheezy and Rumiko became way more important. And all three of them, I think the version you guys got should have had the back matter in it. Did it have yeah, okay, cool. So that was something I was really excited to include, but all three of them are named after really important cartoonists or comic creators. Zelda is named after Jackie Zelda Orms, who was a Black syndicated comics artist in the 40s, who's just incredible, total trailblazer. Wheezy is named after Louise Simonson, who's a fantastic X-Men writer, X-Men editor. And Rumiko is named after Rumiko Takahashi, who's obviously like Inuyasha, Ram Mahaf, Lam, like so many fantastic things. So yeah, that was the kind of the inspiration behind them. And I just wanted to be able to have these characters go to this camp and have a fantastic time and have an adventure, even in the face of obviously having to take down a nefarious corporation, because that's the kind of thing I like to tell a story about. And also it's ecological. So Godzilla has to, in a Godzilla story, you have to have some kind of environmental message. But when it came to how they look, that was like all Oliver. Like I didn't really give him character descriptions in such a way other than like their vibes. So that was really Oliver, and he did such a fantastic job. In my head, I feel like they just came to life exactly as I imagined them. But Oliver, if you want to talk a little bit about and Wheezy's fantastic hair, which was like a recurring thing throughout the book.
Yeah, like initially, I mean, just like Rosie said, she pretty much just gives like a short little character description, some ideas. There were main kind of personality traits, and then I pulled from things that I like out of each of those different types of like kid archetypes. Zelda is probably like the closest to how I would like style myself in real life, in terms of like how she like dresses and everything. And I wanted to go for that kind of like poppy look. But yeah, it's actually funny. Wheezy, I was looking back over, and I'm pretty sure that Wheezy was originally my Zelda in my very early sketches. Yeah, like the way that I was drawing, or at least parts of her. Maybe the hair. I don't
the
really...
hair potentially.
I mean, we're talking like 1-inch little doodles, but I think that's also partially why in the original my original sketch of the whole team, which kind of ended up turning into the cover. Was the first thing that we did. Like she's the one that's like riding on top. So it's a weird little tweak. But yeah, I mean, they were all just so fun to draw. Wheezy's kind of got that little like alt girl thing, but then obviously I love drawing mech stuff, and her having the prosthetic arm, I think really added to that as well. And then Rumiko's like the sporty one. She's Sporty Spice, you know.
Yeah, I really wanted to have like a character who was kind of like chubby, who loved sports. Like the other two, they go there and they think it's going to be an arts camp and they are disappointed to find out it's not. But I wanted to also, I didn't want it to be like an arts versus sports story. I wanted to be like, kids can love both of these things and do them. It's just how the people who are supposed to be looking after them treating them, you know. So I loved having Rumiko, and all I think Rumiko is probably the most like how I would style myself. Like definitely like I'm a like I love to wear a big pants small top combo. So Oliver was really Oliver was really channeling me there. But they're also gorgeous, and I remember the first time ever since Oliver drew the cover, I was like, oh man, I was like, I think this could be like a really special book. Like there was something in the energy. Our Batra book to me is so special, and we've had so much amazing feedback and so many kind people who like they notice the little things that you put in it. So we have a character called Akemi in that book who wears ear defenders all the time, and we had some kids online who are like, oh, I wear those, maybe Akemi is autistic or something. So you get people who notice those. So that was a very special book too. Like I don't want to take away from that, but there's a difference between like writing a 40-page issue and drawing a 40-page issue that's going to come out and exist in that kind of single comic format until it's in a trade, which is great, but then it's in with other stories. So the idea that this was going to get to be an original graphic novel that could live in a library or that could live on the shelf of a school or could be in, you know, in our dream in like the Scholastic Book Fair or something, you know, that was very special. And when I saw that cover, I thought, well, that's like the kind of cover that would make anyone pick it up and hopefully take a chance on this book. So I do think that first cover sketch was really important.
Yeah, the cover is really beautiful. And one of the things that really drew me in that seemed really warm and inviting is also the color palette. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about those choices, because it's very colorful, but also like sort of in that ever so slightly desaturated way that sort of evokes, you know, the warm way that we like remember our childhoods and stuff like that. So could you talk about those decisions?
I will say I totally agree with you. The color palette was like blowing my mind. I think it's like a massively important part of the book. And then I was going to say, and it has like a very interesting story. So I'll let Oliver tell it.
So in terms of like the overall color choices, we had a color assist from Nick Marino, which is Rosie's husband.
Yeah, who also makes comics.
Yeah. And you know, the book came together in such a way that initially I was going to be doing like the whole thing, but toward the end, by the time that we got to colors, it was in a little bit of a crunch mode. So we were like, well, I trust, like I'm personally friends with Nick as well. He's a great guy. And so yeah, we wanted to keep the team tight, close knit, so that we can just kind of like, and a lot of the time as we were working on the book and finishing up, we would just like be on like 4-hour phone calls while Nick was like doing colors, and then I was tandem like finishing them up and doing everything. So I knew that I wanted the colors to be more saturated than in Batra. Batra was very much like a cold, small English seaside town. It was like a small
English seaside town, yeah.
So it was very muted. But personally, I knew after that one, because even you never know how it's going to look once it prints. I was like, oh man, I thought some of these pages were going to pop a little harder. So I was like, I'm definitely going to like push that a lot more, especially, I mean, it works with the material as well. So there was this very interesting dynamic where Nick would put together these really like wild, wacky, verging on like psychedelic color palettes. And again, I think that I generally go with a little bit more of like a muted thing. That's, if you look at like any of my other work, it tends to just kind of be not sepia tone, but it almost has like an age filter over it. And it's just I've always felt like a lot of my colors, I had a very limited number of coloring pencils when I was a little kid growing up. And so I kind of just have always used the same color palettes that I was using when I was like 9, which is it's a very weird way in which that came together. But what was nice is that Nick would put together these like crazy color palettes, and then I would kind of pull out certain things and put back certain things that I normally wouldn't color things in that way, but it was a super interesting kind of collaborative way of pulling me out of my coloring pencil stasis, and so I think it kind of it mixed it up a little bit. But yeah, I definitely was cognizant of like, I wanted it to be fun, summery vibes. I wanted you to feel like, ooh, that looks like a hot summer day, or like, oh, this is fun. I definitely was also thinking about a lot of like shoujo color palettes. I did look at a lot of like Rumiko Takahashi type stuff, Ranma and a half. I was looking at those sort of color palettes because I wanted to evoke some of that. I don't know, some of that like fun, innocent little kid, stuff into it. Yeah.
I definitely think you got like there's a lot of pages, especially when they're in the cabin and stuff, where I really feel like I can like feel the sunlight filtering in and that kind of stuff. Like I really wanted it to feel like you could either remember being somewhere like that, or you really wanted to be in their version of being somewhere like that. And I think Oliver totally brought that to life in like a really special way.
I just wanted to mention real quick, I'm glad that we talked about colored pencils, because when I was reading it and I was, just looking at everything, I could like smell the colored pencils. I was a colored pencil user myself, and you have that very distinct smell of colored pencils that were freshly sharpened, and which is also kind of a summer thing for me as well, I suppose, because that's when I would have the time to kind of lay on my stomach with a sketchbook and use them. So yeah, you nailed it. Everybody nailed it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
I would love if we could talk a little bit about the themes, because I really, you brought it up a little bit that Godzilla usually brings some sort of like environmental message or themes about being caretaker for the planet and like treating that responsibly. What I love is that Godzilla is not an antagonist in this. He is on the side of our protagonist. So that gives it a really, really fun perspective. Could you talk a little bit about what is your approach to treating the themes and the topics that are traditionally associated with Godzilla and then making them your own, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I love Godzilla. Like, me and Oliver are really lucky. We did something that we both really enjoy. I mean, we got asked recently to go to like a Godzilla film festival in Chicago, where we got to kind of meet a bunch of people and share like a teaser of the book. And Oliver got to do a ton of amazing commissions. So it's definitely something that I was already accidentally studied in. Like, I have a tattoo of Manila from the movies from before this book even came out. So I think that for me, I really wanted to make sure, the same with our Batra one, it was kind of inspired by where I live in San Pedro, where there's always, there'll always be like, oh, you can't go to the beach today because there's been a sewage spill. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, how can this happen so much? So in that one, it was kind of a future vision of what it would look like. And Batra is a very vengeful monster. Batra wants to kind of get rid of the humans that he perceives. But in that story, I wanted it to be about how actually that kind of eco-fascism, where it's like all people need to be gone, it ignores that there are actually people who are doing, especially like indigenous people and people who are actually doing stewardship of the land. So that was definitely the theme for that one. For this one, I knew that I needed it to be something that could connect the island with the summer camp. And also as well, I like the read where Godzilla and there's definitely more of the Japanese read than the legendary monsters, which me and Oliver have also done a comic for, which is like the American version. The read where usually in general the monsters can be seen as like a benevolent force. I prefer that version. So I like the idea that there was something that was making the monsters act angry and scary, and they were scaring Manila, and they were not acting as usual, but they were acting how people would want to see them in the book, which is like, oh, I'm a big scary monster. But I wanted there to be a reason behind it, and that was how we kind of came up with the idea that there was this kind of nefarious aspect to make it to more Inc. summer camp. And then I was like, well, let's do fracking, because that's like something that's actually really going on right now. And I think the first so I'm a really bad artist. But Oliver got in the script, and this was one of the first things I ever drew, was I was like, well, if there's fracking, I was like, I generally know how that works. So I did some research, and I was like, well, they have the well hole. And I was like, then Godzilla's gonna put his, as we used to call it, atomic breath, now we call it heat ray. Heat ray is gonna go right up the well hole and explode the fracking, you know? So that was very cool. And it's actually really funny because I was like, oh, that's just, you know, part of the book. And when some of the first early reviews came in, and we've been very lucky because people have been really lovely about this book, someone was like, you know, the political agenda of this book is like quite on the nose, but it works for Godzilla. And I said to Nick, I was like, I don't know if there is a political agenda. And he was like, Rosie, you have a bunch of kids like doing eco-terrorism against fracking. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I guess it could be seen that way. It's just Godzilla. That's what he does. You know, he doesn't like this kind of stuff. So yeah, and also as well, building in the suspension of disbelief that if Godzilla blew up a fracking platform, it wouldn't cause loads more ecological damage. Whereas, of course, like it probably would, but it was the same as in Batra. Like Batra blows up a bunch of platforms out in the ocean and then everyone comes together to tidy it up. So you just kind of want, it's more about making this statement that Godzilla doesn't agree and the kids are going to help. And then obviously the end of the book, you end up with the camp going back into like stewardship for the land and trying to make it like a better place. So yeah, that was the vibe. But definitely, I don't think, even if I was doing like a kids, like a really, like a, they've been doing some really gorgeous like kids books about Godzilla. I think I would always have to bring that element in because it's like so much a part of even like the origins of like 1954 Godzilla being about Godzilla being created by like the horrors of nuclear war. I think that the duality is always there. And I think that kids have the capacity to enjoy and understand a story that has that duality.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in general, those same sort of eco concerns, you know, atomic waste, all that stuff. Perhaps it's not atomic waste currently, although I mean, I think we're just like shipping that stuff off to a cave in a desert somewhere out west. So I mean, a little bit still that, but you know, unfortunately, those same kind of concerns are still possibly even more like apt as time goes on. So I don't, you know, it's an integral part of the character and of the lore in general. And I think that was one of like in our very like the first time I met Rosie in person, that was like one of the things that we talked about as like, oh, I definitely want it to actually I mean I like nature. I go hiking a lot and stuff. Like the idea of being focused on a balanced ecosystem was like something that we both feel really strongly about. And it was in our first like conversation, even going back to like when we worked together on Batra, but certainly in this as well.
I like the way as well that you were able to bring that to life just by how much time they spend in nature. And obviously that's like part of summer camp, but I just think about all the beautiful kind of spaces that you built for them visually and how much time they get to spend just being outside is really lovely.
Yeah, the funny thing is they don't really do a whole lot of like summer camp stuff. They spend most of it
avoiding
being little loners on the edge of the camp trying to, you know, like
that's why I did the big, like, when they go through that big, like, camp night, I was like, what do people do at summer camp? I was like, I never got to go. Like, I love the concept of it. I've seen it in movies, but I was like, you know, archery, like ghost stories. I was like, let's like put it in. And the point is like more ink, don't let them have like a true summer camp experience anyway, you know? But yeah, it is funny. They're more like on the edge. My perception and like books that I've read and watching summer camp movies, I feel like the special moments are those moments you get to spend with your friends when you're kind of doing your own thing. So I wanted to kind of channel that into the thing. But yeah, it is quite funny. I was like, oh, we got to add in like more summer camp things. Like, and I'm like speaking to Nick and I'm like, you worked at a summer camp. Like, what did you do? And I'm like putting them in. So I feel like that bit, they're making s'mores. Like
I do think there's a nice message there too, you know, because I feel like More Inc. is very like informed by a lot of the educational systems that our children grow up in that are like very competition based, you know. And then to see that, you know, the counterpoint of like the collaboration but among the main group is like really lovely. And I think it's perhaps like empowering for kids who like might be like big scary structures, you know. So
just gonna add and say, you know, like growing up, especially in my I mean, literally this town that I live in is like, it has like 3 stoplights and it's surrounded by cornfields. Like it's very rural. And yeah, so I mean, I remember I spent whole summers, like we didn't have a summer camp, but I spent whole summers like playing in dirt by railroad tracks. So like the idea of kind of being on the outskirts was something I definitely felt a congruency with. And then obviously with a lot of schools in general, at least to mine, and mine was, you know, very small. But it was always the whole idea of like a lot of the sports stuff, and I was in sports too, but a lot of the sports stuff got disproportionately funded above the arts programs in general. Even during my time at school, like 2 of the art classes, and we only had like 4 or 5 different things. So if you were like wanted to take an art class every year, you had to take the same class over and over again. But 2 of the different classes, like shop and something else, maybe ceramics, got like canceled. They took them off the roster. So it's like, I feel like it's a very common thing that if you're like an artsy kid or an artsy and sporty kid, which is like what Wheezy is, you're constantly kind of facing that sort of a reality. So
Absolutely. Well, this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your book with us. It was so fun to read, and I'm very excited to share it with our patrons here.
Yay. Our dream is really to get it into libraries. Me and Nick just did ALA. We were in the Zine Pavilion, and we were it was like a very profound experience for both of us, but especially for Nick. It was kind of the platonic ideal of doing a show like that. So to get it into the hands of librarians who are able to get it into the hands of hopefully like the right kids or the wrong kids who might not think they like it at all, but then they end up loving it, or kids who say, well, this isn't the right comic for me, but maybe I love comics now, like whichever kid, I don't mind. I just hope they get to read it. So thank you for having us on, and thank you for being in the library, because that's like a really important institution that's very special to us.
Thank you. Gosh, like Zine Pavilion is like maybe the most beautiful combination of words in the
Yes.
like that's great. Yeah.
It was so amazing. Like, no joke. It was just like, because it's not because everybody goes there, and there is a expectation of things being free, right? Because it's a publisher show, it's a trade show. So you get to essentially live in like an anti-capitalist society where everyone's just like, would you like to read this zine that I made? Yeah, I'll swap it with this. Or, oh, I went to a publisher booth and got this book. And it's very much about like meeting with other like-minded people, meeting with librarians, meeting with creators, and not about selling, which is so many of those shows are about. So it was really special. We had a very good time. ALA is very magical. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Well, thank you so much again. This has been really lovely. It was so nice to chat with you.
Thanks, guys.
thanks so much for having us. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
No problem. All right, please check out Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp. You won't regret it. This has been so beautiful. Just signing off. This has been Jen and my co-host
Jessica, thank you so much.
And we were joined by Rosie Knight and Oliver Ono. Please check this book out. You won't regret it. All right, we'll see you soon. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.